The wedding hall buzzed with laughter and chatter as guests admired the lavish decor and waited for the bride to appear. Cameras clicked, children ran between tables, and everyone assumed this would be just another beautiful ceremony. Another girl in a white dress marrying into a wealthy family. But no one knew the truth. No one could guess what was about to unfold. She stepped out slowly, her face half covered with a delicate veil, the soft jingling of her bangles barely audible beneath the music. At first glance, she looked like any other shy, graceful bride. But there was something in her walk, calm, steady, and deeply confident, that didn't quite match the timid smile on her face. The murmurs started quietly. Who is she really? Why does she carry herself like she owns the room? Among the crowd, a few raised eyebrows and exchanged curious glances. Some whispered that she wasn't from here, that she had arrived with minimal family, no fuss, and yet something about her felt ... royal. Still, no one dared to ask too many questions. The groom stood waiting, clearly nervous, trying to hide it behind a rehearsed smile. His family, on the other hand, looked slightly uneasy, almost like they weren't fully in control of this ceremony. And then it happened. As the music slowed, and the officiant prepared to begin, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the entrance. Two guards in ceremonial attire stepped forward, clearing the aisle. A velvet box was brought out, placed gently before the bride. She opened it without hesitation. Now there it was, a crown. Real, radiant, and ancient. Gasps filled the hall. Phones dropped, mouths opened. But who was she? And why was a crown being placed on her head? The answers were just beginning to unravel. The room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of the bride lifting the crown with calm hands and placing it on her head with practiced ease. It was like she had done it before many times. The glow of the jewels reflected in her eyes, now steady and full of quiet power. The groom, still frozen, looked around in confusion. His mother clutched his arm, whispering something sharply. But even she couldn't hide the fear creeping into her eyes. Whispers turned into low murmurs. Is that real? What's going on? Who is she? A few older guests exchanged glances that suggested they had seen something like this long ago. Something they had hoped to forget. The bride's expression didn't change. She stood tall, composed, her presence shifting from modest to majestic in mere seconds. The crown wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol, and its meaning was beginning to settle into the minds of those watching. Rumors started circling within the crowd. Someone claimed she was the last living heir of a royal bloodline erased from history. Another said she had been hidden for years, raised in secret after a political betrayal. Some insisted this was all a performance, a staged trick. But then, why the guards? Why the crown? And most of all, why the change in the groom's family, who now looked less like hosts and more like prisoners of the moment? Every eye was on her, but she wasn't looking at them. Her gaze moved slowly to a man, standing quietly at the back, tall, dressed in black, his face unreadable. He nodded once. She gave the faintest nod back. The tension in the hall thickened, because this wedding wasn't about love anymore. It was about reclaiming something lost. And the bride had just made her first move. The whispers had grown louder, but no one dared to approach the bride. Even the groom stood stiff, unsure whether to speak or step away. The guards flanked her silently, their eyes scanning the crowd. No one knew where they came from, but their presence was enough to keep everyone seated. What was supposed to be a grand wedding had now turned into something else entirely, something much older, deeper, and dangerous. In the far corner, the groom's uncle slipped out quietly, pulling out his phone and speaking in hushed tones. "She wasn't supposed to show the crown," he said, panic in his voice. She was only meant to attend. Stay silent. If the council finds out she revealed herself, his voice trailed off as he noticed one of the guards glance in his direction. He quickly ended the call. Meanwhile, the woman in the crown, still unnamed to most, remained composed. Her eyes scanned the room not in fear, but as if she was reading an old map. Every face meant something. Every whisper held weight. Somewhere near the center aisle, an elderly woman wept softly. She recognized the crest on the side of the crown. It belonged to a kingdom that had vanished decades ago, buried under politics and betrayal. But those stories were meant to be myths, weren't they? Backstage, the wedding planner paced nervously. "This isn't part of the program," she whispered to her assistant. "Who approved this entrance? Who is she?" But no one had answers. Even the groom's father, usually firm and commanding, now sat still, staring at the bride like he had seen a ghost. Because maybe he had. Maybe he recognized her face from a night long buried in history, when a young girl was taken away. So no one would ever know her name until now. The air in the hall grew heavier with each passing second. The bride, now wearing the crown openly, took a step forward. Her heels echoed sharply against the marble floor, a sound that silenced even the quietest whisper. Every eye followed her, but she wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. She was walking straight toward the groom's father. The man's hands gripped the edge of his seat, knuckles white. His face drained of color. He stood up slowly as she approached, trying to mask the fear rising behind his composed expression. "You shouldn't be here," he said under his breath, but the microphone caught every word. The crowd gasped. "You were never supposed to come back." She stopped just a few feet away from him. "You knew who I was the moment I walked in," she replied softly. "You recognized me before anyone else did. Just like you recognized my mother before you betrayed her." Gasps echoed around the room. Cameras, now recording steadily, captured every second. This was no longer a wedding, it had become something far more public, far more dangerous. People began to realize they were witnessing the return of someone powerful, someone long erased from the story told by the groom's family. The groom, still standing at the altar, looked completely lost. His bride, whom he thought he barely knew, was now confronting his father with truths too heavy to ignore. His eyes darted toward the man in black, still standing silently at the back, as if hoping for answers. But none came. Outside, black SUVs began to arrive. A few men in suits stepped out, eyes scanning the building like they had been preparing for this moment all along. Inside, the bride raised her hand, not in threat, but in declaration. And what she said next would change everything. Her voice was steady, but carried a weight that made even the air feel colder. "This marriage wasn't a union," she said calmly. "It was a trap once set decades ago. And today, I walked straight into it. Willingly." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The groom took a step back, his confidence shattered. The bride turned toward him, her gaze sharp. "You never knew who I was, and that was your mistake. You thought I was just another pawn." The black-suited men who had arrived outside now entered the hall, their presence commanding. But instead of heading toward the bride, they walked past her and stood beside the groom's father. That's when the second twist hit like a wave. One of the men pulled out a document, holding it high. "This is a royal claim to inheritance," he announced. "Signed and sealed. The woman standing here is not just royalty. She is the rightful heir to the land your family controls." Gasps turned into chaos. Some guests stood in shock. Others began whispering about secret property disputes and royal estates once taken by force. The groom's mother broke into tears, whispering, "They told us the child didn't survive." The bride didn't flinch. "They lied," she said. "And they raised me in silence while you built your legacy on stolen land and a stolen name. But I didn't come here for revenge." At that moment, the lights flickered. A faint beep echoed from the speaker system. The planner's assistant panicked, checking the controls. Then a voice played through the speakers, grainy but familiar to a few. It was the voice of the groom's grandfather. "A hidden recording. Bury her identity. If she ever returns, the entire empire falls." The room froze. The bride looked up. "And now," she whispered, "it begins." The room erupted. Voices shouted over one another, some demanding explanations, others trying to leave. Security tried to keep order, but no one knew whose side they were even on anymore. The bride stood firm, the crown still on her head, unshaken by the chaos around her. The recording continued playing, revealing names, dates, and details of the cover-up, how the groom's grandfather had orchestrated the disappearance of the rightful heir and forged papers to transfer power to his own bloodline. The groom's father collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He had spent years building a legacy that now crumbled in front of 100 witnesses. The groom, pale and trembling, stepped toward his bride, searching for anything to say. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "I swear, I didn't know." She looked at him, softening for the first time. "I believe you," she said, "but it doesn't change the truth." One of the royal officers stepped forward and handed her an old document sealed in gold, untouched for years. She opened it slowly, then turned to the crowd. "By the power invested in me by my bloodline, I reclaim my name, my title, and the lands stolen from my family." Applause broke out from the unexpected, cautious. Then a few guests stood, showing symbols on their wrists. Supporters, hidden for years. They had waited for her return. But just as it seemed justice had been served, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the hall. One of the side doors burst open and in walked a woman, older, draped in black, eyes locked on the bride. Everyone turned. The bride's breath caught. The woman whispered, "You're not the only heir." And just like that, everything changed again. For a moment, the hall went completely silent. The bride stared at the older woman, confusion written across her face. Then, a flicker of recognition. The woman stepped forward slowly, her voice calm but firm. "I was hidden, just like you. But unlike you, I chose to disappear. I gave up my claim, until I saw what they were planning to do to you." Gasps moved through the room again, but this time the energy shifted. The bride, now fully aware of who stood before her, nodded. "You're my aunt," she said softly. The woman nodded back, her expression bittersweet. "Your mother's sister. I thought keeping quiet would protect us all." But silence only helped them grow stronger. The bride stepped down from the stage, walked to her aunt, and gently removed the crown from her head. "Then let's not repeat their mistakes," she said, placing the crown between them. "This isn't about power anymore. It's about truth and healing." The groom's family remained seated, stunned, as the royal guards began clearing the hall. The documents had been verified, the titles restored, and the land rights officially returned. The once grand wedding had become the turning point in a forgotten royal story that the world was now eager to learn. Outside the hall, news reporters had already gathered. Cameras flashed, drones hovered, and the internet buzzed with headlines like "*The Royal Bride Who Changed Everything" and "Stolen Throne Returned at Wedding Ceremony." But inside, away from the noise, the bride and her aunt stood together for the first time in decades, two women who had survived history's silence. As guests slowly filed out, some wiping tears, others still in awe, one thing was clear: this was never just a wedding. It was a reckoning, and a long overdue return of truth.